Wow. I think that's really the only way to react to that game initially. 36-24. The 49ers win. The sky was falling after dropping their second consecutive divisional game Sunday when they blew a double-digit lead in the fourth quarter to the Arizona Cardinals. They fell to 2-3. It made Thursday feel like as much of a much must-win game as a game October 10th could possibly be, and the 49ers won 36-24. Uh, wasn't exactly a pretty game. Didn't exactly go to plan. You had another special teams touchdown that gave the Seahawks some life after it looked like the 49ers might blow things open. The Niners opened up a 23-3 lead. Laviska Shenault goes 97 yards on a kickoff return to breathe a little bit of life back in Lumen Field. You get a Kenneth Walker touchdown. All of a sudden, what looked like a laugher, you're feeling a little bit stressed because it's 23-17. And then the 49ers get a touchdown from George Kittle. They get an interception from Renardo Green. They get a Kyle Juszczyk touchdown after a big Isaac Guerrero run to seal it, essentially. You got players celebrating with their wives behind the end zone. And you have, I think, without question, the Niners' biggest win of the young season. And if they go back and if they go on to make a run and end up winning the division, I think we can very clearly look at October 10th as the inflection point. Kyle's not here. I am riding solo. Kyle does post game for a prominent radio station in the Bay Area. He doesn't like to brag about it, but that is why on these primetime games he is not with us. He probably could uh, make time to record a podcast, but it'd probably have to be like midnight or 1 in the morning, and he's got an early morning radio job in Sacramento that he has to get to. So forgive us if it's just me riding solo tonight. Um, yeah, just like a ugly win, like so many injuries, right? You lose Malik Mustafa, George Kittle's going to the locker room, Aaron Banks is dealing with cramps and getting his hamstring worked on the sideline. Even the backup kicker gets hurt at the end of the game. We'll have to see what happens with Matt Wright um, going forward. It's not a huge concern because the 49ers did just have three other kickers in the building, so they might not have their next decision might not be far away when it comes to finding another kicker after Jake Moody injured himself on Sunday. But Jordan Mason leaves the game. It felt like when Jordan Mason was, he had the injury. I think it was in the second quarter, banged up his shoulder, left the game, went to the locker room to get X-rays, came back out after halftime, had the first play from scrimmage, I think, in the third quarter, and just hit had a outside zone to the right along the sideline, left the field, never came back in. When Jordan Mason didn't come back into the game, it was kind of like, oh, right. Like it feels like when the 49ers blow these games, there's always like one injury that you think that might not seem super important, but when you look back, it was like, oh man, they didn't have Jordan Mason in the second half. No wonder they couldn't salt this thing away. And it felt like that's where things were headed. You get the Kittle touchdown, you get the Chenault kickoff return, and look, Kyle Shanahan was defending the special teams play. He mentioned the fumble in the first half that was forced, and the fact that they got a touchdown on Sunday against Arizona. I just don't. It's once a game, man. Sometimes twice, where the special teams really cost the 49ers in a big way. And yeah, you get that fumble off an earlier kickoff return, and it sets up a field goal. But you absolutely cannot allow a kickoff return touchdown in that game after you go up 20 points. You just can't. And so at some point, I wonder if Kyle Shanahan's going to make a decision on Brian Schneider. And I don't know how easy it is to find another special teams coach in the middle of the season. But through 6 games, you go back through each one, and it feels like there is a major special team screw up along the way, particularly in the losses. In Minnesota, you had the block punt that led to a touchdown. You missed a field goal. Against the Rams, you had the big punt return that set up the game-winning drive. Against Arizona, you have Moody having to make a tackle because the coverage is bad, and then you lose that game essentially because you don't have your field goal kicker the rest of the way. And then tonight you give up a kickoff return touchdown where guys are just bouncing off Laviska Shenault. Jalen Mahoney is down there completely unblocked, and I understand he's a practice squad guy and he just got called up and he's like the team's 5th or 6th safety. But he was as effective on that kickoff return running down there and just getting run by and not even getting within 5 yards of Laviska Shenault. He was as effective as I was watching the game from my couch in Sacramento. So at some point, the Niners special teams has got to be addressed. And maybe, one of the things NFL people talk about when their special teams struggle, particularly when you deal with a bunch of injuries, what happens is, guys who were playing on special teams get thrust into more important roles. And then your special team suffers because you have practice squad guys running on special teams. And Jalen Mahoney's a classic example of that. So a lot of young guys on special teams, a lot of first and second year players. Maybe that's where Kyle Shanahan thinks this is going to improve, just with those guys getting more experience, but that's clearly problematic. But bigger picture, the Niners won. They needed this win in the worst way. They're 3-3. Somehow they're leading the NFC West. I came into the game thinking the Niners were clearly a much better team than the Seahawks, despite their record. The Seahawks haven't beaten anybody good. They've beat the Denver Broncos in Bo Nix's first start. They've beat the Miami Dolphins playing Skylar Thompson. I forget what their other win was, but it wasn't great. Or it wasn't against a great opponent, I should say. The New England Patriots, who the Niners obviously defeated. I just thought the 49ers would win. I predicted 30-22, I think, in the lead-up podcast. We were close to that. It just feels like the 49ers, when they know their backs are against the wall, they just know how to win those games. And there's something about playing in prime time and being in the all-white uniforms and being in Seattle, that they've played some of their best football over the years. You remember the season finale in 2019. You remember Thanksgiving last year. This game was obviously a must-win. It just feels like there's always a different level they reach when their backs are up against a wall and they have to win against the Seahawks. And even 2 years ago when Brock Purdy was making that start, coming off broken ribs, I think that was Brock Purdy's second start after Jimmy Garoppolo went down with the foot injury. And that was a huge game, right? Like, Brock Purdy had to play a big game on an important stage to help the team, maintain its standing in the playoff race. Brock Purdy tonight, I thought, was really good. I thought the pass protection, it might have been the worst pass protection the Niners have had this season. Our buddy Nick Wagner at ESPN texted us saying that Purdy was under duress on roughly half of his dropbacks, according to numbers that he has. And it looked like it. It looked like a lot of improvising. It looked like a lot of, pocket awareness, and Purdy needing to manipulate the pocket, needing to extend plays and find his guys downfield. Oddly enough, I thought one of his worst throws was the touchdown to Deebo Samuel, the 76-yarder. That ball was in the air forever. And I don't know what the Seahawks safety was doing, because I thought for sure it was going to be an interception. The way he was breaking on the ball, he ends up taking a terrible angle, obviously doesn't intercept the pass, doesn't even break it up. doesn't come close to slowing down Deebo Samuel. And it's a 76-yard touchdown the other way, giving the Niners a 10-0 lead. But I thought Brock was really sharp otherwise. There was a bunch of talk about the 49ers struggling in the red zone, rightfully so, right? They go 3 for 5 tonight. In large part, I mean, they had the run late from Juszczyk, which counts as a red zone trip, but they had really 2 great plays by Brock Purdy to hit George Kittle for touchdowns. The one in the front right corner of the end zone was a dime, and it was on a 3rd down, and that was probably the biggest play of the game, just in terms of overall importance, because it did give the 49ers that 20-point lead. And excuse me. And obviously the 49ers, until running away with it late, needed every point they could get. And had they just kicked a field goal there, it would have felt like one of those ominous things, like, oh man, they're still really struggling to get into the end zone. Because I think the Niners were 1 of 3 at that point. Or actually, no. I think they were 0 for 2 at that point in the red zone, because Deebo's touchdown came from obviously well outside the red zone. So that kind of, I think, alleviated some of the tension. The fact that the 49ers were so bad in the red zone, to get a big touchdown on a perfect pass from Purdy, on a great catch from Kittle to keep both feet in bounds and knock over the pylon there. I think that sort of eased the pressure a little bit, and then allowed the 49ers to kind of play with a little bit more freedom, because it did feel like they were tensing up. There was the one red zone trip, it's 3rd and 11. Mason was out of the game. Felt like Kyle Shanahan was just in a bad way. They run a screen to Kyle Juszczyk, and I know Shanahan told reporters after the game that, had Aaron Banks blocked the defensive lineman that thwarted the play, it would have been a walk-in touchdown. I don't know, man. If you need to dial up a screen to your fullback on 4th and 11 in the red zone, when you have Deebo Samuel, George Kittle, and Brandon Ayuk on your team, it feels like you're in a bad way. And it felt like the 49ers were in a bad way until they got that Kittle touchdown. And then they got the other Kittle touchdown, where Kittle, I don't know if it was a choice route or not, but Kittle found an opening, got inside leverage, put a good move on the inside player there, and Purdy delivered a, well-timed, accurate throw. Overall, I thought a really, really good Brock Purdy game. Not like an incredible Brock Purdy game, but a really, really good one. Because, I think if that first touchdown to Deebo Samuel gets intercepted, you wonder how the rest of the game goes, because it felt like that ball was just in the air for way, way, way too long. And had he thrown it a little bit more on a line, I mean, maybe the safety doesn't overrun it in that sense, and maybe it's not a touchdown because the ball gets to Deebo sooner and the safety's still in front of him instead of the safety overrunning the play. But otherwise, really hard to pick nits in Brock Purdy's performance. It's not like the Brock Purdy experience is a lot different than Jimmy Garoppolo for a lot of reasons, but I think the number one difference is the fact that you don't get the plays that, like 2 seconds in, it's a potential disaster, right? Like when Jimmy Garoppolo so often would have to extend plays, you just be like, nope, throw it away, dude. You just got to throw it away. And then he would force it in somewhere over the middle of the field, and it would either get intercepted or get his receiver decked. And you don't really have those moments with Brock Purdy. Like, he misses in the right spots. Like he'll dirt some passes, he'll throw, wide on some out routes. Like, that happens. But very rarely does he have sort of the head scratching throw that makes you say, man, that was awful. Purdy went 18 of 28 tonight, 255 yards, 9.1 yards per attempt, despite completing only 64.3% of his passes, 3 touchdowns, no picks. Just the efficiency, that's always what stands out when you look at a Brock Purdy stat line, is just the efficiency, the yards per attempt number. If it's around 9, which it tends to be often for him, it's an efficient game. Geno Smith, man, Geno Smith to me, I understand why people really like Geno Smith because there are a lot of like football dorks. Steven Ruiz, Niners fans' favorite quarterback analyst, Steven Ruiz, loves Geno Smith. And I understand why, because there are some times where when he's in rhythm and when he's throwing to those pass catchers, he's pushing the ball downfield. He just looks like a high level quarterback. But here's the thing, and this is what I think people miss a lot in the Brock Purdy discourse because there are some people who would say, "Oh yeah, Geno Smith is way better than Brock Purdy." But in all these big games that Brock Purdy plays against, these other quarterbacks that he's often compared against in the NFC, Brock Purdy outplays him, right? Brock Purdy's outplayed Dak Prescott a few times. Brock Purdy's outplayed Jalen Hurts a few times. Brock Purdy's definitely outplayed Geno Smith, including in the playoffs. Um, so if you want to make the argument like, yeah, Geno Smith has a better arm and he's a better deep ball thrower and those types of things, fine. And maybe, you know, like I'm just not a fan of I don't understand the purpose of doing the thing where, well, if you isolate the quarterback irrespective of his variables, of the quality of his receivers, the quality of his system, how good is that guy? To me, that is a silly exercise because never is there going to be a situation where all these quarterbacks are completely independent of their variables. And the point of that, I guess, is to rank the quarterbacks, but like why? Like what do we all learn from these rankings? Other than it gets us all emotionally hijacked because we all have our own biases and we enjoy watching the players that we like, right? So the Purdy thing, however you feel about him, he just tends to outplay these guys who he's often compared with. And that's the only point I'm making here when it comes to Brock. Defensively, Malik Mustafa was having a great game before he left in the second half with the ankle injury. You got an interception from Renardo Green on a pretty bad pass from Geno Smith, who was hitting himself in the head with a tablet afterwards. Um, I don't know. I've never, even when I'm mad, I don't feel like hitting myself in the head with electronics, but to each their own. Isaac Rendo with a big run at the end. Somebody pointed out that, Isaac Rendo running behind Dominic Pooney. You got a really good Jake Brendel block on that last long run that essentially sealed the game, the 76-yarder. But it was behind Pooney. Like the 49ers rookies came through in certain instances. The secondary I thought was really good. Um, it's still pretty clear that Isaac Yiadom is the biggest target. If I'm an opposing quarterback or play caller, I'm locating 22 and I'm throwing to his guy. The big play to Tyler Lockett, I think that set up the Seahawks' second straight touchdown during that 14-0 run. That was obviously on Ike Yiadom. And but other than that, like, those plays from Mustafa and Green were obviously enormous. The 49ers win the time of possession battle, or sorry, the turnover battle, 3-0. I just lost my place on the NFL stat site. Here we go. We're back. And Kurt Herbstreit mentioned it in the second half of the game. Of their 3 touchdowns, they scored 12 points, and the 49ers won the game by 12 points and were up by 12 points in the fourth quarter. The turnovers were the difference, and it's not groundbreaking analysis, to point out that turnovers do play a very big role in the outcome of these games. And I'm going through Nick Wagner's. Nick gets a lot of pub on this podcast. We should start to get some residuals from Nick, our favorite cast member. Nick had the stat, I think, before today about the turnovers and how they've impacted the 49ers results. As I scroll for it, this is bad preparation on my part. I apologize. I was watching the Kyle Shanahan press conference before hopping in the lab to record this one. But the point is, here we go. From 2019 to 2023, the 49ers were 33-3 when they were +1 or better in the turnover margin, including a perfect 21-0 when they were +2 or better. They were 16-4 when the turnover margin was even, and 5-22 when they lost it. That is per Nick Wagner, ESPN 49ers reporter. 5-22 when they lose the turnover margin. 33-3 when they're +1 or better. So 3-0 tonight on the turnover margin. I thought the secondary playing as well as it did without Charvarius Ward was enormous. I thought it was, I was expecting a long day for Isaac Yiadom. I was wondering if DK Metcalf was going to go off. DK Metcalf had the body language of, a 12-year-old who got his switch taken away. Throughout the entire game. It started early on. There were some incomplete passes. He had a drop. Body language was awful. It was it was a weird scene seeing DK. I don't know what the deal was, but just the body language in a big game, like that's like your dude on offense. That's your best receiver. Like you need, I'm not like leadership rah guy, but like you don't want your guy throwing a fit. He wasn't throwing a fit, but just kind of looking, I don't know, pissy on the field. I don't know what the deal was with that. But that to me was kind of a good sign. Like the Seahawks offense, one of the differences between Thursday's game and Sunday's against Arizona, Arizona got off to that fast start. Right. And that was the feeling at halftime. It was like, yeah, the 49ers were up 10 points against Arizona at halftime, but the Cardinals are still averaging over 8 yards of play in that game to that point. And I was like, this could get a little weird because the Niners defense is not slowing down Arizona. The Niners defense looked a hell of a lot better against Seattle. And Kenneth Walker, I know he had the touchdown, but the Seahawks ran 20 times and only had 52 yards, 2.6 yards per carry. That is getting the job done against the run. And another big reason I didn't think the Seahawks had a great chance in this game was just their offensive line. Their offensive line is not good. It just isn't. Still not good. The Seahawks might never have a good offensive line. We'll have to see about that, but it was not good in this game. The sack numbers weren't really there for the Niners because I think Geno does a pretty good job of getting rid of the ball. Niners didn't have a sack until Sam Aquanu late, but I mean, it felt like Nick Bosa was a beat away from getting to Geno like throughout the game. He was only officially credited with 2 quarterback hits. I'm guessing when the PFF numbers come out, Nick Bosa is going to be either a green or blue graded player according to PFF's according to their grading color scheme. Go into the chat. Feel free to leave a comment. Writing solo, sometimes I tend to be all over the place. It's nice to get a comment and something to talk about from you guys. Let me know if there's something in particular that you guys want to talk about. We do have our Cooperage live event on Saturday. Kyle will be there. I will be there. And yeah, it's going to be really fun. It's our 4th year in a row. We will be doing a live. It won't be a live recorded show. A lot of people say, "Oh, you should record the show." I like just drinking beer and firing takes from the hip without worrying about it getting on the internet. And, I understand people might have their cell phones out and they want to take videos or whatever, that's fine. But, like it might be a long day of drinking on Saturday because Ohio State plays Oregon in the afternoon, a game which will probably be wrapping up right around the start of our event. So, I might be a few pops in and I don't necessarily want my drunk self out there on the internet. So That's why we don't record the live shows, and it's also logistically just a big hassle to not only record it, but also, amplify the sound through the microphones. So come to Cooperage anyway. We have a George Kittle signed football that we're gonna raffle off for. We're gonna raise money for the Redwood Empire Food Bank. We have a pair of game worn signed George Kittle gloves, and we have a pair of Tabor Pepper autographed cleats. We're gonna raffle those off individually, so we can maximize the winners and get you guys to buy as many tickets as possible. Um, yeah, I think the Candlestick Chronicles is going to taste great on Saturday, says Earl the Cat. I'm incredibly jealous. Yeah, you know what? It always tastes great. I have a case of it in my fridge. I'm not drinking it right now because it is a school night and I don't want to be I want to be kind of clear-headed while I'm trying to deliver this content to you guys. But um man, big Debo Samuel game through the air. Yeah, the 76-yard touchdown, 3 catches, 102 yards. Obviously inflated by the big play, but you know what? Like, the big play counts. So it counts towards the numbers. Isaac Guerrero, 10 carries, 99 yards, looks great. Oh yeah, he had that long of 76. Mason, 73 yards on 9 carries, playing hurt. We'll be very interested to see what the prognosis is on him. I know he's been, when he left the game, he was officially the NFL's leading rusher because he had played more games than any other running back, obviously, because it's Thursday heading into week 6. But the reason why, I think a big reason why the second half felt so uneasy was the fact that you lost Jordan Mason. And we hadn't seen really anything from Isaac Guerrero during the regular season that made you think this guy was ready for a bunch of carries. Nor did you feel all that comfortable about giving Debo Samuel a bunch of touches, given the beating he tends to take when he gets a lot of carries. Debo finished with 4 runs for 15 yards with a long of 5. So it wasn't like Debo in the running game was super effective. But, when you have Isaac Guerrero and Pat Taylor as your only available running backs when you came into the season thinking you'd have Christian McCaffrey, Elijah Mitchell, Jordan Mason as your top 3 guys, and you're essentially down to your 4th and 5th tailbacks, and you're trying to hold a lead on the road in a division game where the other team has some pretty explosive pass catchers and a quarterback who likes to huck it deep. It was an uneasy spot. And I think the 49ers do deserve some credit for holding on. Even though it probably was more uneasy than it should have been. Right? Like the feeling of watching that game is like, oh man, here we go again. Like when the Seahawks cut it to 6 on that Kenneth Walker touchdown, it was at the end of the third quarter. It was like, man, they cannot blow a 20-point lead after blowing double digit leads to the Rams and the Cardinals. They just cannot. Like that would kill their season. And this team is way too good on paper to have its season killed in week 6. But they didn't. They gave up the touchdown. The game got as close as 6, and then you get the George Kittle touchdown. Seahawks were hanging tough, and then you get the Renardo Green interception. You get the second Kittle touchdown, and then you get the big run from Isaac Guerrero. The Seahawks were simply missing too many guys, and they have a first-year head coach, and their offensive line is not that great. And DK Metcalf is in whatever mood he's in. It just felt like that is a game the 49ers absolutely have to win, which is why the kickoff return to Laviska Shenault that goes for a touchdown is so frustrating, because that's a game the 49ers probably win by 21, 24 points if they don't give up that kickoff return that gives life back to the Seahawks and into the crowd, into the stadium. Having been to Seattle, and if you guys have listened to this podcast, me covering the team for almost a decade, like Seattle is definitely one of my favorite places to watch a game. Not only because the press box, some of the press boxes are like in the very last row of the upper deck and back in the corner. They're like not particularly good views. You're like halfway up in Seattle, which is nice. Um, but it's also just so loud. And even though the press box is sealed like Levi's, you still get a feeling for how loud it is. And when it's jumping, when something crazy happens, the actual stadium does bounce. Like that's not fake. There's like 6 inches of travel where you're like sitting there and all of a sudden you're kind of doing this and you're just like, that is weird. That's not supposed to happen. But in that place it is. And that's why, momentum is a real thing in that place. So it's a tough place to win, and you understand why George Kittle says things like he loves playing there, and it's a fun place to play. It's a fun place to watch games on TV. I don't know, like the shots of the lake and the cityscape and all that worked for me. Um, all right, Niners win, a big win. We'll see about the injuries. Um, it sounds like Christian McCaffrey is going to be back in November. Um, so the 49ers now have the mini bye, the quote unquote mini bye, before they play the Kansas City Chiefs, who are coming off their actual bye. And then they play the Dallas Cowboys, who are also coming off their bye. And then the 49ers have their bye. So a couple of games, obviously the Chiefs Super Bowl rematch twice over. We'll talk plenty about that game because I do have some thoughts. And I actually don't hate the spot for the Niners in that game. But we'll talk about that as it comes. And I think they're going to be fine. Like, I didn't come out of this game with more fear from a Niners perspective of Seattle. Some like I can't you come out of Sunday's game against Arizona being like, man, Arizona might be like kind of a pain in the ass to play. And they might be a team that you really have to think about. I don't really get that feeling from Arizona or from Seattle, excuse me, because Seattle was so banged up defensively. Again, I think Mike McDonald's a good coach, but I just think it's really hard to be good in the first year of somebody's tenure, right? Like you remember when the 49ers hired Kyle Shanahan in 2017, they were 0-9, right? Kyle Shanahan's a good coach, but it's hard to win in your first year. Like Jim Harbaugh, what he did in his first year was an anomaly, in large part because the Niners roster was already super talented. I think aside from a couple guys in Seattle's secondary, Witherspoon and Reek Woolen, and obviously their receivers, I don't love Seattle's roster right now. I think they got some ways to go. I think Byron Murphy's going to be really good, but he wasn't there tonight. Um, there's not the Seahawks feel like they're a year or two away of like really being like a real playoff team, one that's not like Geno Smith carving up the Dolphins and the Patriots to get to the playoffs. So if I were to make a hierarchy of the NFC West, I would have the Niners first. I'd have Arizona second. I'd have Seattle third. And the Rams fourth. Man, Rams are 1-4. Niners losing to them is still pretty wild. Like if Niners should really be 5-1, for being honest. And I understand. I know that's the frustration with this team is that you blow two very winnable games against division teams. That's as frustrating as it gets. But like sometimes what you need to get you through a long 17 game season is the energy boost that comes from winning a game in adverse circumstances. Right? Like I think Kyle Shanahan talked about it post game. He was saying there was an element of human nature where like you don't have the same level of intensity when you're sort of expected to win and your back's not up against the wall. But clearly the Niners' backs were against the wall on Thursday in Seattle, and they played like it, and they came out and won and looked far more like the team we expected them to be, albeit, it wasn't quite as dominant as I think it would have been if they had Christian McCaffrey. And if they had been operating at, full strength, if Brandon Ayuk could play during training camp and the 49ers, didn't sort of back into this season with Brandon Ayuk still rounding into shape and figuring things out from a chemistry standpoint. Anyway, turbulent start to the season, but if there's a silver lining to it, the Niners are 3-3. They're currently in first place in the NFC West somehow. They improved to 1-3 in the conference. Not great. Seattle's 0-3 in the conference, by the way. They're 0-1 in the division, but I do think the 49ers have played all three teams in their division now. Barring injury, there's no reason the 49ers shouldn't run the table in the division and finish in the division 4-2. They'll have Seattle at home, obviously winnable. They'll be angry when they go play Arizona later in the year in Arizona. And the Rams are coming. I think it's in December on a Thursday night. I forget exactly when. But the Rams might be really bad. Although we'll see. They're going to get Cooper Kupp back, I think, in Puka Nacua, and we'll see if they're still a bad team by then. But the Niners, I think, should win their remaining NFC West games. And if they finish 4-2 in the division, I think they'll have a really good chance at winning the division, obviously. And given the start 0-2, blowing double-digit leads, I think you'd feel pretty good about 4-2 in the division. So anyway, with that, Kyle and I will be back to talk about the game upcoming against the Chiefs. Real quick, I got Prize Picks. Man, this was a frustrating night of Prize Picks. So as you guys know, if you listen to the pod, I had Jackson Smith and Jigba more than 5 receptions. He finished with exactly 5 receptions, so I did not win that. I had Juwan Jennings fewer than 30.5 receiving yards. He was in fact fewer. He had 27. I had Brandon Ayuk with more than 65.5. He was at 37, so I didn't get that one. Jason Myers, Seahawks kicker, I had him at more than 1.5 field goals. He finished with 1. That's kind of frustrating. And I had Deebo Samuel scoring a touchdown, which I thought was the easiest play on the board. So I only won 2 of 5. I had a push. I had one more field goal attempt from potential big money in my five play flex play. So that's my Prize Pick entry for the week. Make sure you check out Prize Picks. Use promo code Candlestick to get. Let me make sure I get this ad read up here. Download the app. Use promo code Candlestick to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Again, that's code Candlestick to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Wanted to make sure I had that correct for you guys. Don't want to misspeak. So shout out to Prize Picks. Shout out to our sponsors, Cooperage, Lamb Chops, Prize Picks. And we will see you guys Saturday night at the live show in Santa Rosa at Cooperage. It's going to be a lot of fun. It always is. We love Cooperage. We love the beer. Go get yourself some Candlestick Chronicles Hazy IPA. I promise you will love it. Cooperage is your favorite brewer's favorite brewery. I'm telling you. If you're familiar with the Sonoma County beer scene, you know some of the heavy hitters that are in the area. There are people who brew beer, and this is 100% the truth. I know this for a fact. There are people that work at these other breweries. They make beer, they serve beer at the other big name breweries in Santa Rosa. And they go to Cooperage to drink after work because that's how good the beer is. And if that's not the best endorsement for a brewery, I don't really know what is, because I think you guys have an idea of the heavy hitters I'm talking about. They could stay there and drink their own stuff, but they prefer to go to Cooperage. So come hang out with us. We're gonna raffle off we're not gonna raffle off some auction items. We're gonna raffle off some raffle items, and we'll raise some money for the Redwood Empire Food Bank, near and dear to my heart. We worked with them a little bit when there was the fire in 2017 that burnt up so many homes, including my former house in Santa Rosa. We worked with the food bank to get them some food and distribute some stuff. So it's always important to support them whenever we can. So that's why we work with the Red Oak Empire Food Bank and donate to them at these live events. Um, so see you at Cooperage. If not, we'll talk to you guys next week on the podcast. Kyle will be back. You won't have to listen to my rambling. And yeah, 49ers win, first place in the division, and now we all get to enjoy a long weekend of football without having to stress about the 49ers blowing a double-digit lead in the second half. So until next time, cheers.